Okay, to start off with, I'm not sure why this topic was called Seven Pillars because I haven't read the book just yet. But big data and analytics is actually a lot of common sense. So if you really think about it, it's catching up today because honestly speaking, in Indian business, and while we are a startup and we really don't have customers, so I'm really the authority on speaking on this because we have no customers to analyze. But the fact of the matter is, in my previous roles, what we really observed is that technology in India is fairly legacy, especially within the life insurance space. And honestly speaking, most of the dregs of society within a life insurance company actually sit in IT. So whatever Drayton actually said was very, very relevant in terms of the fact that let IT not decide what business really needs to do. And I also head that function, so I completely relate to what he just said. Importantly, I think from my past experience in terms of the use of big data, there are a couple of points which actually need to be taken into consideration. In the sense that number one, where is this data residing? Typically in an Indian organization, because of the fact that you have legacy systems, it resides in silos. So number one, how am I really bringing all this data to one platform in one recognizable format? Number two, who needs to use this data and why? So the role identification itself in Indian organizations today is fairly weak. A lot of people actually sitting in business intelligence departments, feel that they're like a guardian cobra which is sitting over a treasure and doesn't really want to divest its ownership of that data. Number three, what are the real insights? So if you were to really look at the use of analytics, I would say it basically uses the hindsight of the organization to create insight, which basically leads to foresight, which is actionable. So who actually should be the recipient of that data and how actionable is that data? That to me is something which is not really perfected by organizations, especially in the financial services space, even today. It is happening, but it's happening in silos. And finally, how well is the IT structure of the organization really in control? So what does that mean? It means how clean is the data? Who's really governing that data? Who's really making sure that that data is actually being updated and being given to people to use? These are the things that really strike me as far as data analysis is concerned. And it is an evolving journey as far as the financial services space in India is concerned.
So I come to this from a very different perspective, and I kind of agreed with Drayton when we heard him speak, that it's very important that you understand what data is. And there is so much data that is around that we don't even look at. The two major sources of data within a company are from your employees and from your customers. And very few of us look at those. But what we want to do is use all of this without understanding how to really look at acquiring this data from these people. And then, of course, there's this huge amount of data that is available outside that we're not tapping. So, for example, if you're an airline, there's data about how many flights are full at a particular time, and from that you can, if you can really pull out and analyze the information, you can find out what and how to price. And those kinds of things have yet to come to a large number of companies. The fact of the matter is that only 18% of the companies in the US state that they have big data skills. So the skills are not there. And only 19% say that big data is helping them with sales effectiveness. So if only helping with sales effectiveness is 19%, how much is it helping in sales? So before you start jumping on all of this, you've got to look at it from that point of view. And then when you start to use it, the first thing you have to be able to do is describe what your need is. What am I really looking for? What am I going to do with this data? How am I going to find this data? The next step is if I find this data, how do I evaluate this data? How do I make this data really worthwhile? And the third part of it is, how do I really explain this data once I've evaluated it to someone else? And then how do I use this data to predict an action or predict what I should do? And so there's a bunch of steps, and you can't leave all of these steps to IT or one particular department. You have to break silos. So I think it's extremely important that you first understand the basics before you jump into big data and start to look at analytics and start to look at all kinds of things.
So, primarily, if you look at, again, both general life insurance or financial services as an industry, there are few challenges that restrict us to look at what kind of a data and how we use data in the past. And he rightly pointed out, saying one is probably, every company has their own legacy system. Things happen in silos, and so the data doesn't talk. But the very important, the key about making a profitable business in financial services is purely about how do you collect the data and build a data-driven organization. Because whether it is about product pricing, or whether having a good book, or whether serving your customers so that you're able to retain them over the period of time, all depends on what kind of a data that you have on board. And I think one key part that I have realized is, this the whole data initiative can only start when it comes as a organization initiative, right? Because there's lot. The key challenges would be where to start, and what kind of data you need to start collating, and what are the areas which you should pick up and use that as a business case. Because otherwise, the whole big data is a very, very vague term, and you don't know, as he rightly pointed out in the inaugural session, it's about finding out most relevant data about your customer, right? It's not about just collating data across. Some of the things that, like in Tata AIG, we clearly looking at that as a key focus area. We've just recently launched a mobile app called Telematics, which will track driver behavior of different customers. And then in future, we would like to have products which are priced basis on this segmentations or personalization kind of thing. It's very, very clearly that you can't just have a in current scenario, if you go with the way products have been structured, it's more of a commoditized, right? Unless you don't look at your data in clear sense and start building a segmented approach to your market, it will be very, very difficult to build this growth, build a growth for your organizations. And that's where I think organizations would start looking at data and how the data can be structured.
I'm not sure I agree with a couple of things you said. I think too many of us are looking at big data because we've grown from small data. So we know what we want to do, so let's make it big data. One of the points about big data is you're looking for something that doesn't exist. You don't even know it exists. You don't even know it's there, but you want to know what it is. It's like the butterfly effect. So I'll just give you an example. A lot of money was spent on collecting data in this election in Delhi. Lots and lots of money was spent. And the bulk of it was done in the traditional fashion, and it didn't work. Right? Most of the people said Kejriwal would get 30 seats or 25 seats or 40 seats. He landed up with 67 seats. Now the question is, if we had gone to a big data approach, would we have come closer to that 67 seats? If we were going to go to the big data approach, we would actually go into the space where there would be information floating around that we hadn't actually asked for. You know, we didn't go about asking Kaizad, what do you think, will Kejriwal win, or asking you, will Kejriwal win? But it's some stuff that's hovering over us, and I go around and I start to collect that in a way that allows me to perceive what is really happening. That's what big data is all about. If we are trying to just collect something that's out there, and we do information gathering the way we've been used to doing information gathering, then we're missing the whole point of big data. So the question I have is, would big data have really predicted Kejriwal's huge win? How many of you think it would? And if the answer is we don't know, or then you're not going to use it. Right?
Yeah, actually, I think, keeping in mind this very interesting point that you raised, I think big data actually works better when you are dealing with a known commodity. Kejriwal, to that extent, was fairly, ephemeral in his last avatar, and therefore people really weren't too decided in terms of, whether he really stands for something or he doesn't. I think he actually gained more from, we are moving to a political discussion, but he actually gained more from the other side's over-communication rather than his own exploits. So to that extent, I don't think big data would have ever been able to pick that up in terms of floating at an ephemeral level to that extent. It was very ethereal. It wasn't really hard fact or past precedent. Big data is good when you have hindsight. It's not really good when you talk about concept, because then you're looking at far too many surrogates. And if you don't get your surrogates right, your data points will lead you in a completely different direction.
I still think it has to do with trying to get foresight.
You need some amount of hindsight to build insight.
Yeah, but it's like the butterfly effect. Big data is all about the butterfly effect. Something happened somewhere, and through this process of analysis, would it impact me?
Very, very ethereal. Anyways.
Yeah, now when it comes to moving back to big data analytics, you have some.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to ask one question. So, Keza, can you tell us of an example where obviously you had some insight on how you use big data and,
Sure.
that would be helpful.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting that in my past avatar, I actually worked with India's largest life insurance company in the private sector. And the one thing that we really realized is the fact that a lot of people actually, for example, came to our website, but ended up paying in a completely different fashion. So they were very web savvy. They used the web to service themselves. But for some reason, they never really looked at paying online. And honestly speaking, it doesn't cost you more to pay online. It costs the insurance company a lot more in terms of the cost of collection, but it doesn't cost the customer anything. So one of the things that we realized is that through the back-end data in terms of identifying their PANs, we also figured that a lot of them were credit card holders. So we used that data to actually incentivize them, and while you can't do that upfront, we had various content and other schemes which we ran to actually make them pay. So if we were to look at a really successful story, within a matter of a year, our online payments went from 12% to 50%, which is huge. The only guy crying was the finance person because our cost of collection went up. But the other thing that we realized is that when people pay online, they honestly want to look at insurance much like a utility. However, the difference between insurance and a utility is that the frequency of payment is very, very spread apart. So typically, people buy insurance for a 1-year tenure and then keep paying their renewals 1 year apart. So what we realized is that if a person can give a mandate on a utility, he can definitely do it for an insurance product as well. So we were actually the first industry to actually introduce a mandate on a credit card without any paperwork, which no other insurer was doing and still isn't doing. And the mandates that came in added to an upswing in terms of premium assurance of close to 1,000 crores, which is a huge amount of money. It's about 10% of the total that we collected. So that's how data actually helps in terms of converting an insight into actual business result.
Yeah, in terms of the big data analytics, so like of course, it's been gaining momentum last few years. Is there any skill set for a people who have to analyze? Is there a skill set? Is this something of a high skill set workforce is required to do this analysis, or is the guys who are doing normally? So if some insight can be thrown into those, in terms of the skill sets of the people who
See, if you were to really look at a very, very high technology setup where there are millions of transactions, for example, in a telecom unit, and I also come from telecom, so I understand that telecom's been using big data a lot longer because they've got far more intimacy in terms of transaction. If you were to really look at a good quality structure in terms of an IT structure, you need a very good business solutions architect who understands on how the data needs to be arranged. You need a very good quality person who understands statistics and data science and how that data needs to be grouped in terms of the defining parameters. And finally, you need a very good campaign manager to group that data and actually bring it to a fructification. So if you were to look at a typical marketer's job, what are the three things that he really looks at? Number one, what's selling in the market? Who's buying? Okay, so what is my customer really buying? Number two, what are the conversations or the transactions he's having after he's bought? And number three, what are those campaigns that work for him to buy more and stay with me, which is the typical customer persistency life cycle that you see. So if you were to really look at it, the positive outcome, and if you were to look at it, there are 3 or 4 positive outcomes that big data actually delivers to a marketer. Number one, the customer buys. Number two, he stays persistent. Number three, he buys more. And number 4, he brings in more people to the fold. And that's how he adds to his lifetime value. So if big data is not achieving that for you, then it's an exercise in futility, in my opinion.
So, while Kaizad is absolutely right, I suspect you're looking at data which is within your company. But I'm coming from looking at data that exists all over the place, and you need to analyze that data. So you simulate something, and you say such and such thing happened here, and I can see the results of all of this, and was it really caused by that, or was it caused by something else? And so you're actually looking for causes, because the data that you have is not really consistent data, because it's not been collected. As I said, it's not would you vote for Kejriwal? It might have been an entirely different set of data that was collected and was residing out there, and you try to simulate from there and find out whether would you vote for Kejriwal. So there's a lot of simulation that goes into it. There's a lot of trial and error that goes into it. There's all kinds of stuff that the analytics has to do, which you might not do in a straightforward data set that is consistent, that you know is, I hate to use the word pure, but something that you know that you asked this question and you got this kind of a result. You know who you asked the question from, because in the kind of big data we're talking about, we don't even know who was asked the question. So it's an entirely different kind of a thing, and you just keep number crunching, and then you need people so you need that skill, and then you need the people who can really understand the results. So you get all of these results and you say, what does it mean? So so much more predictive. So that's why I started by saying that inside the company and outside the company.
So, as I mentioned, the way the organization should be looking at it, probably is the data that is available with them and data that you require from outside. And, the first step should be the defining certain objectives that you want to achieve through this initiative, right? It might be probably I want to, design a product which will bring more profitability to the business, or I want to reduce my loss ratios on certain book. And then looking at, what is the data available plus what is the data, available outside the company, and then marrying it and building models so that you are able to generate, you are able to have results which you started with, right? And that's a way to look at it. Not being confused with the typical big data definition where we're trying to look at social media data, probably a lot of other data which may not be useful for the objectives that you are set up for. One way to look at it, as he says, is probably just look at the open data and try to discover something out of that. But that I guess would lead to not, the organizations would like to define certain things and move into a direction, right? And that's where, moment I have certain objective, then probably look beyond organization on what data is available. The way in Tata AIG we look at it is probably we have Tata Group as a group company and group customers as a external environment for us, because unlike in a lot of other countries, in India the external data availability is not very clear. So you'll have to see the defined data available or the structured data available outside your organization and try and marry it with your state objective and your customers. And that's the way we are approaching it internally. And to answer your question, yes, we need skill sets of people who can work on this data, build predictive models. So you need a lot of people who understand statistics and build models around the data.
Okay. I agree with you, and I think therefore one of the things that needs to be done within the companies is a more structured approach to capturing data. How do you capture data that frontline people are talking about? How do you capture data that customers are talking about? How do you capture data that other people in the company are talking about? And that's another skill set that's needed.
Yeah, that's actually what I mentioned, that how clean is your data and how do you govern it in terms of its recency, frequency, and transaction history is something that most Indian companies haven't mastered. I mean, even if you look at the telecom companies, and I've worked with the large ones, I mean, while they have so much intimacy, they are still crunching, at a billing level rather than at a customer level, to be honest with you. So it's one of those skill sets that we need to develop as a country very, very clearly.
So the big data outside is not clean. So how do you treat unclean data?
Okay, this is another interesting question in terms of unclean data. Let me flip it around a little bit in terms of where you can find clean data. So within the insurance space, for example, at the regulator level, everything that happens within every company is recorded and reported in a particular format which is audited by the regulator. One of the things that the insurance industry is doing in right earnest with the regulator is democratize that data so that we can build risk profiles. Now, if you were to ask me, is every person who uses social media a potential insurance customer? I think not, because there's far too much risk attached to it. But if we know there are profiles out there which have been sold a policy, who have tried to have malified intentions, it would be that much easier to build profiles as to who not to sell to and who to sell to. So if I were to flip it around, there is no clear answer in terms of what is that white space out there which we need to really correlate facts and data with. But if there is large amounts of data which already exists, how do we really democratize it, mine it, so that the industry can do a lot more in terms of clean selling? That would really be a big help.
Sorry.
Yep.
I'm finding it very interesting because I'm dealing with people who are within an organization. So it seems like there are three steps to this then. One is using data that you already have or you can collect within your organization using data or at the industry level, and then going outside, which you said is still beyond us. Okay, so I agree with it.
We're just running short of time, so I'll just open it to the audience if anybody has any questions before we end the panel discussion. So any last questions anyone has?
I think we're standing between you and lunch, so.
One question?
Yeah, probably, the way we are trying to tackle this is build our own data structure, and then, like I said, first streamline our own data structure and then try and add layers of data on top of that. That's the way we should be addressing. Over the period, I think companies should have a meaningful data with them, and rather being dependent on external sources like Facebook or Twitter or any social networks for that matter, because the rule of game would always change. They will today they will disclose certain data, tomorrow they may not.
Exactly.
But
Even the behavior, the pattern is different on different platforms.
correct.
So how are you going to align them and then derive something out of it?
No, like I said, it is always good to start building your own data and BI analytics base, which is deriving from your customer side, your profiles, and then adding every other data that you are able to gather about the customer.
Okay, so I think I would like to summarize this discussion with one sentence I read long time back, never forgot. It says that everything that counts can't be counted, and all the things that can be counted may not count. So the fact of the matter is, I think, along with this big data, I think if you honestly ask me, my experience for the last 18 years has shown me that even small data is not effectively utilized by organizations. There's so many small insights you can get on every single thing that you do. If somebody would just look at Google Analytics on a day-to-day basis, Google AdWords accounts, social media listening, there are so many small insights that you can actually do. You can improve what you're doing by 1% every day. The compound effect of that could be phenomenal in the next 1 year. But the thing is, along with that big data, which has become a buzzword, we need to look at small data and take actionable insights on a day-to-day basis. So may I end this with a round of applause for the panelists?